right, well, good evening, everyone. I'm Dion Morales, host of the Gold Squadron podcast and streams and all that. I want to say thank you to the Nova Open and Roy for asking me to moderate this panel. I want to thank all of you for joining us, and today we're going to be talking about how Xwing 2nd Edition is going to transfer over into the competitive scene. So let's go ahead and introduce everybody on the panel. We'll start over here and work our way down.
I'm Ryan Staniszewski. I'm from Michigan, and Xwing. Sure.
Woo!
I'm playing 2 years, 2.5 years.
There you go.
I'm Andrew Bunn. I'm from Seattle, Washington, and I've been playing Xwing for about 2 years as well.
I'm Duncan. I'm from Maryland. I've been playing since 2015, early 2015, 3.5 years.
I'm Paul. I've been playing, I don't know how long. How long has Xwing been out?
6-ish years,
That's about how long.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I'm Alex. I'm one of the designers of Xwing 2.0, and I worked on 1.0 for about 5 years. I've been playing it since the core set.
All right, so let's get into some questions. Panelists, I'm going to give you guys an open-ended question. Feel free to conversate with each other, expand on it. Here we go. So the first question here is, how do you think the wide release of Xwing 2nd Edition will affect the emotions and the growth of the competitive Xwing community? There's a lot of changes. People have lots of feelings on it. What are you feeling? And we'll go from there. Let's start with Ellen.
Sure. Well, that's an interesting question. Xwing's a really passionate community. I think everybody is well aware of that. And it's a community of people who cares really deeply about Star Wars generally and the game specifically. Certainly my hope that 2.0 will be really warmly received because the driving force for the redesign in the first place was really a lot of the community feedback. Like, we really did listen over all those years, all those emails that we got, all those rules questions. We do read the forums.
I'm sorry.
You know. So I mean, we did take a lot of community feedback, and a lot of it really lined up with what we wanted for the game too. So it's my hope that once the wide release happens, once people have kind of dealt with, converting their ships over and absorbing some of the new information, getting appraised to the new rules, I'm hoping that it'll just be bigger and better than ever. And I think we're on track for that. I've heard a lot of excitement this weekend, and I've certainly been really enjoying my 2.0 games. But I think it's maybe a better question for the community itself, which we have many representatives of right here.
Paul?
2.0 good.
2 words.
Yes.
Works
that's all you need to know.
It's worse for me.
I've had a lot of people come up to me and ask me like, "Oh, so what do you think about 2.0?" And I'm like, it's just better in every way than 1.0. You remember all the stuff you liked about 1.0? That's 2.0. And all the stuff you hate about 1.0, we tried to remove it. And hopefully we did. I mean,
Hopefully we got most of it.
Unless you like overloading stuff in 1.0.
Yeah, well, that's going to be a real big learning curve for people that started in the last like 18 months or so.
Oh, for sure.
And they're like, what? My arcs matter now, and and I have to guess what my opponent's doing, and I have to learn the rule of 11.
Bombs don't work like bombs work.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
1.0.
Yeah, lots of big changes for people to come to, but I mean, you saw out there, we actually had a lower turnout, only about 100 people per day, and that's because of it's 1.0, and next year it's going to be really crazy out there. I think we're going to need a lot more room.
Yeah, I think it creates a lot more room for growth of the game. Like, we had some drop out. Like, anecdotally, some tournament turnouts have been a lot lower than they have in previous years. I think there's either people are finding this they're tired of 1.0, which is probably the thing, and then there's people who find this as a good dropping off point. Jeremy, for one, is quitting. But I think after this, people are going to start getting into 2.0, and I think that it creates a lot of room for development. It's like it has potential for growth.
I think one of the things we're hoping too is it's going to be a good place for new players to start. I think one of the stumbling blocks with 1.0 is that at a certain point, to play the really competitive lists, you had to kind of chase down some hard to get upgrade cards. You had to kind of do this scattershot collecting from all the 3 different factions. You had to hunt down the stuff that was, dominant in the meta, or at least viable in the meta, and it was all distributed kind of willy-nilly throughout a whole bunch of random packs, just by the way that the distribution model ended up working out. And that was a fine model for casual play, but for competitive play, you kind of had to hunt down auto thrusters or whatever it
Go
was.
buy a
that
Star Viper.
Exactly. Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
I mean, before that, like the competitive Worlds list all cost about $250 to get into.
So with 2.0, it's a really great reset button. It's a way for people to get into the game relatively inexpensively, comparatively inexpensively. Conversion kits have pretty much every upgrade card in the game, so it's easy to just convert everything over. And if you're brand new, there's going to be formats that are new releases only. So if you only want to buy 2.0 ships, you don't want to worry about the conversion kits or any of that stuff, we're certainly going to support people who just want to play with only the things that have been re-released into second edition. And that's a kind of fun, small little tournament when you can just fly out like Xwings and Y-Wings versus, TIE Advanced and TIE Fighters and the occasional Reaper or whatever. So it's an interesting format to narrow that lens down and play with way fewer ships and upgrades than you're used to.
Yeah, the conversion kits were a good call.
Yeah, necessary, fully necessary. Like we would not have embarked on 2.0 without that. That's totally crucial. Can't leave people's whole collections in the lurch. So,
Thank
you. Yeah.
Andrew?
I mean, in Seattle, at least we've seen like a lot of turnout, especially since Gen Con, because like we brought back tons of like core sets and conversion kits. So everyone's been really excited for 2.0. Like game nights were kind of dead for a while. Like I mean, it was tough because we had the announcement at Worlds, and so everyone's like, well, what do we do until it comes out? So things kind of died down, like you were saying. And now like everyone's coming out, everyone's really excited to find out what's good. So we have like all the regulars coming back, which is awesome. And then like I've talked to personally like some people that are interested in getting in the game, like you said. And, like I think it is going to be a much potentially much bigger than it ever has been. I think it's really good for the game, and there's no reason it wouldn't be good for the game. And like Duncan said, there's like I think the scaffolding's much better. Like things are much more well thought out. So there's definitely a lot of potential. And I like the wave 1 and stuff release idea because I think it's definitely easier to balance if we like ramp out one wave at a time and stuff like that. So there's a lot of promise, and I'm really excited. I mean, some of my favorite stuff is gone, but oh well. No
Like
Otani.
what? Like what?
No
So-
Otani. No
Yeah.
auto thrusters.
Yeah.
Wait, they have auto thrusters.
It's there. The art's there. But yeah.
Atani's pretty cool.
And
We may
really
find a way to do that in a little more limited, insane fashion. at some
Yeah,
point.
I'm excited for when it comes back. I mean, there are the robots or the IDs,
true.
so it's basically there.
Right?
Yeah, and just like everyone's mentioned so far, it's been a lot of hype around it overall. And I've seen enough players that played first edition that just got tired of it, and now they are super excited to come back. It's a win-win across the board. You're getting mostly people back. There've been a couple who felt that, and honestly, that they feel like buying it over again. But I look at the conversion kits like it's a clear value easily.
Yeah.
You're able to set yourself up for future, and the foundation that's been put into place opens up a lot of mechanics that I could foresee in the future, which is really cool. Like we saw Calculate, and like, well, they're the droids. So just like I'm seeing tip of the iceberg here. There's probably a whole lot more we don't know.
Oh, there is.
Nudge, nudge.
Definitely.
Well, I think this is a good transition to start talking about what got us to a point that we needed a second edition. Actually, we're gonna start with Ryan, and I want you guys. Every player, I feel like, has a different opinion as to what was the worst offender. Let's go ahead. Let's get past the pain.
Let it out.
Let's let it out now. Let's let it out now.
It's gonna be
Alex saying
cathartic.
he's to blame for each part.
Cathartic.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna start with Ryan, and then we'll end with Alex so that he can put a bow on it.
Try. When I could take a list that I played 5 times and win a regional with it, it was Ghost Fen. Just the combination of cards.
Do you really need 5 times?
Like, it got to that point where you saw the combination of cards and the builds, and it offered too much that one thing could completely take care of, that you needed so much to focus on in your own list building if you didn't play it, or if you didn't counter it, you were already at a massive disadvantage. And from what I can tell in second edition, there's going to be ideally a lot less of those complete hard counters. There's going to be more of a chance you're in most of these games. So.
Good, Andrew.
I don't know. I think Nim is probably the thing that stood out to me as the thing I hated the most. But I feel like I played against Miranda a ton, and like she's probably one of my least favorite things to play against. Just that, like, you have to be able to overcome that region, or like have more points than her at the end game, which has always been tough. But Nim, like especially, I think the worst was the advanced sensor Nim, where like when people started to realize everything you could do with like boosting and barreling before you drop the bomb, and there was just nowhere you could be if you, like luckily like it was fixed, or like the advanced sensors changed with Genius came out pretty soon, so that wasn't a problem for too long. But that was some rough times, and really like took out like half of the ships in the game that couldn't be played.
That's a real tough one. Because you just start pulling at that thread, and it just goes back way too far, right? I think we come back all the way if you keep unraveling it. You go to primary weapon turrets.
Sure.
Because after that comes auto thrusters.
Which that even predates me.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact.
After that comes auto thrusters.
Yep.
And then there's TLT and Miranda.
Yep.
Right? And that was probably where I would say the most broken thing came in. Like, I'll be honest, Palpatine in the old way was just he was necessary. Like, you could not fly Imperials without him. But then
the only way you could hit like Civ 2 was with bombs. So
yeah, but then you get Sabine, and then you get bombs, and then you get harpoons and all this other stuff, whatever order that came in, and then it's just. I think one of my least favorite parts to play in, we'll say, was advanced slam bombs.
Oh, those are fun. Those are awesome.
I got you an arc. Good game. Like, what?
How is that fair? My fun arc. Oh, Fenrir's dead.
That's awful. Paul's really enjoyed all the broken stuff.
Yeah, like I don't know. I've always played the broken stuff, and as long as you're playing the broken stuff against similarly broken stuff, usually both you and your opponent have fun. Like when I played at
Top medalist.
Yeah, like when you're playing the at Nova Open last year, the top cut was fun. We were all playing stupid nonsense and breaking the game wide open.
But don't you feel like some of it's like, I mean, certain things are better against other things, so there's a big advantage one way or another. So.
Oh yeah.
I had all primary weapon arcs.
Yeah, you had no chance of winning arcs.
I know. That's why I won the bracket that we bet on. I bet on you to beat me.
But in the Swiss rounds, that was miserable and no fun for anyone when like my list went up against a normal person's list, and like it's like, oh well, you brought a fire spray to nationals. I'm sorry. Like, and then you dismantle them, and you're like, okay, well, good luck. And so yeah, that I think the big problem was the disparity in list power.
Mm-hmm.
Like they kept making a lot of the things better, and they left a lot of stuff behind.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna interject if I may.
Oh, okay.
It goes back to like what Ryan says. Like sometimes when you just put your list on the table and see what your opponent's flying, like you just know you lost unless there's something crazy that happens. And like the one thing you were saying about 2.0 is you always feel like you have a chance.
Yeah.
Whether it's you have to fly perfectly and they have to mess up, like it's still a chance.
There's definitely less disparity and less, at least as far as we can tell so far.
Yeah.
On the surface.
Well, I mean, I think, like, hearing all this is just exactly why we did 2.0 in the first place, and why we fundamentally changed the way that we approach designing for the competitive scene entirely, because working on 1.0 was always really challenging, because the only way we could address that disparity was through Band-Aid and patch and retroactive upgrade card. And we couldn't touch the point values that were printed on the cards. We couldn't take older ships and give them actions that they should have had, or give them ways to play the game that they weren't capable of. Like, you couldn't go and just put a Talon roll on an Xwing. And so part of 2.0 was just coming back to basics and kind of looking at every ship that we've done, which is a huge number at this point, and then really looking at the dials and kind of bringing the really strong dials down a little bit, bringing the really weak dials up, and then, like, moreover, just trying to hit the theme of the ship. X-Wing is a space superiority starfighter. It should be pretty flexible and fairly maneuverable. So that's part of it. And then the other part that I'm just super psyched about is just being able to retroactively adjust points values. So much can be solved through just that. And not only points values, but upgrade slots. Like, it does require an app. It does require a little bit more of a check-in process, and it's a little more work for us because we have to constantly reevaluate where things stand. But you can just, like, type a number in and fix something that would have required an errata and a lot of conversations with various people at the company who are in charge of approving such things, and a lot of thought about like, well, if we do this is going to unbalance other things. So from the perspective of just keeping the game really vibrant and more to the point, like keeping that number of viable lists, because of course there's always going to be top lists, it's inevitable. But if there's 20 top lists versus 3, that's way more fun and way more interesting, because then the matchups are much more uncertain, and you can have really interesting gameplay happen when one of these top 20 lists fights a list and you've not experienced that before. So that's really exciting. If I had to pinpoint something as the most broken thing in 1.0, it's super easy. It's the very first thing I broke. It was like baby's first broken Xwing mechanic. It was the original TIE Phantom. That was the very first wave I worked on as just a young developer. Very, very, very first experience with Xwing. I'd played a little bit before then. I'd done a tiny amount of playtesting, and I'd worked on other minis games and other games. But it was a cool idea. We went through like 9 drafts of the cloaking mechanic, and unfortunately, the one we ended up with, while it was really cool, as soon as it got into the hands of like the really ace players, they just annihilated people with it. I mean, anytime you can have an 86-point list, win tournaments.
86, yeah.
I don't think you can get any more busted than that. No other list, no matter how degenerate, was ever able to trim 14 points off and still managed to win games. So that'd be my vote. 16 points. 86? Anyway, it was a lot. I can't
86,
math.
yeah.
So yeah, I'd say TIE Phantom. And I'm really pleased with the 2.0 TIE Phantom. We kind of redesigned the ship. A lot of people are sad that 4th attack die is gone, but it's for the best. It really is. I promise.
Now, we're going to take one more step in the negative direction. We're going to bring it all back. We're going to have a happy ending, okay? So are there... right? Are there any outstanding issues from first edition? Because a lot of players, we there's all this positive stuff, and first we go, but what about that? Right? What about that?
What
one
about
thing?
Luke Gunner?
Right.
What about
Exactly.
him?
Are there any outstanding issues from first edition that that could still be a thing in second edition that maybe we need to address? Like players might want to be addressed. I'm going to start with the players first again.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Please tell me.
Yeah.
We'll see if I can do something about it.
We're going to start with Duncan. I don't know if you... Is there anything that comes to mind?
I haven't played enough.
Something's carried over from 1.0.
Yeah, something that maybe you could still do in first edition in second edition from first.
I mean, trying to think about it real fast, like trajectory simulator is still a thing. I mean, like if I have to say it, like that's there.
That's a good
Okay.
one. Even though it's not technically in first edition, supernatural reflexes
Oh, yeah.
is basically that on ships.
Decloaking?
Like, if you've ever played Kylo Ren with advanced sensors and push the limit in 1.0, supernatural reflexes is basically that.
It's
Where-
decloaking phantoms,
Or-
is the original ones,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, it's very similar to that too. Yeah.
Because you still get your action after.
Yeah. So it's pretty scary there have been times in playtesting where it was just like, oh, so you did that and your entire list is pointing this way? I'll be over there now.
I mean, the day they give us a PS6 with boost and barrel roll. Like that.
Well, it's not going to happen in
Yeah,
anything
please,
I've designed.
please don't. Please don't.
Don't do that.
So far so good.
Yeah, so that whole
I mean,
my
Vader's
one
got a lot of
ship,
health to spend on supernatural reflexes.
He does. That's no
Yeah.
joke.
my one ship figures out and has perfect information and then goes somewhere on the board wherever he wants.
No, that is a fair point, and that's one of those cards that may just keep increasing in points until it's like,
Yeah.
There's a few. I mean,
199.
1 million points.
Well, I can run
1
just
billion.
Kylo with supernatural
I feel like-
reflexes.
Yeah, if Kylo's 187 points, I'm good.
I kind of like the push and pull between the aces and the generics in second edition. I feel like it's in a pretty good spot with supernatural, even on Vader
We've
right
tried
now.
to really
Just 'cause,
distance those point values, make those aces really expensive.
Yeah, I think, because Vader still gets punished from range 3 shots all the time, even if you're
Yep.
like, because eventually you're probably gonna have to take risks to like kill things, and I don't know, it's still, I think it's in a pretty good spot right now with Supernatural the way things are, like just what we've seen so far. But like, so personally, I like Supernatural reflexes because I feel like it gives you a chance. If there wasn't Supernatural, I don't think you could beat like Ty Swarm with an ace right now.
Kind of scraping bottom of the barrel here because I think Trajectory and Supernatural is already really good, but I think when it was first announced that when you're Ion, you still do a blue maneuver, but you can only focus, I think that still doesn't keep someone from being walked off the board, I guess, and it doesn't stop the train if you, like, say the Brobon's that won. You can still make that. So, I mean, that's still something that carries over that might feel bad, but I don't think it's terrible. Like,
And there's still Connor nets too.
Yeah, there's been stuff already mentioned that's way over like what this is, but I think the retaining of the thought of the Ion that you can only focus afterwards, he's still getting walked a direction.
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if it was you or one of the other designers that said if Ions are good, the game is broken.
I think that was either Frank or Max.
Sure,
I know,
blame the other ones.
I know Max in particular hates ion weapons. We had a big discussion of how to bring them back a little from their 1.0 form, but not make them useless. Because I think they're really cool. I like control effects. I'm kind of a Johnny player. I like, manipulation. I like that kind of thing. I thought it was amazing what Simeon did with two IG-2000s at Worlds, and I thought that was really impressive. And I don't want to totally eliminate that kind of play, because it's really cool. But it is frustrating. Like, it's undeniably frustrating to lose control of your own ships because of what your opponent is doing to you. And whether that's tractors or ions or what have you, or stress. There's a lot of effects that any sort of debuff, token stealing, dice, re-rolling their attack or defense dice. There's a lot of mechanics that take the control away from the player. And so you have to be really careful with those mechanics. And so one of the things we did with all the ion stuff in the game, with the exception of Connor nets, which we also made harder to land, but with all the ion stuff in the game, and this will be a continuing thing, the first hit that goes through is damage. The second hit that goes through is ion. It's harder to consistently ionize people, but it's easier to damage them with ion weapons. So ion weapons have retained, hopefully anyway, this is all theoretically, of course, until people actually play it en masse, but hopefully ion weapons are still good, because they can still push damage through, because they get their range bonuses now and are a pretty affordable option. But hopefully that, like, will they get ionized thing is much more of a, I don't know. Your defense matters more. It's harder to ionize aces than it was in first edition by a significant amount. So you have to push 2 through to hit someone like Sunterfell, and that's way more difficult. But if you only push 1 through, it's still hard Sunter. That's still not a thing he
So I
wants.
need to get 3 in.
Exactly. So
Why was he an arc?
good point. That's a very good point. Maybe they had a turret and they rotated it. But yeah, so I mean, so like, yes, that's a very good point. Like, we want to be very careful with tractor, ion, stress mechanics have been mostly stripped out. There's a few, but they are not. They're hopefully quite under control. 4 alarm's pretty nasty. 000s were quite good, but they're all very range 1 dependent. There's no more double tap with a Y-wing, 2 stress, infinite stress stacking. We're being really, really, really careful with control effects and that kind of thing, and automatic damage.
See, I lost things too.
Yeah, I just heard Paul die.
So with the initial release of point values a few weeks back, what do you believe is the leading contender for most improved ship chassis?
The Punisher.
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 Even more than the Hawk?
Punisher.
Punisher.
Yeah, you're right. It's the Punisher. It's the Punisher. The Punisher really was just the redheaded stepchild of first edition. That poor ship. I didn't want to break it, and I didn't.
Right.
That got a little too much.
The bomber got pretty good
Yeah,
too.
Punisher
Yeah,
is
bombers.
amazing in 2.0. That thing is heck fun to fly.
Everything you will not find in the top 20 tables out there is pretty good.
Well, there was a Punisher yesterday. He
Yeah, it
almost.
was.
Almost.
You know,
He almost
Death
made
Rain,
it.
Death Rain is actually okay. Death Rain in 1.0 can be cool. Tournaments have been won with Death Rain. Here and there.
How many?
What are maybe some other ships that have improved vastly?
I mean, the Hawks, that's an easy answer. Although there were a lot of viable Hawk lists in 1.0, they were almost all centered on the scum abilities because they're super strong, and I made those abilities super strong because the Hawk was a hunk of garbage.
Right.
So 2.0 is nice. It's got a better dial. It's got a stop maneuver. It's got bombs. It's got, in some cases, well, the pilot abilities are kind of the same but different. They're a little harder to control because there's not 360 range. You have to point the arc. But they're still just as strong as they used to be in terms of what they actually do. And it has 2 attack dice. And it has a turret that those 2 attack dice rotate. It's cheaper. And the Moldy Crow title is awesome. So, I don't know. I think Hawk is easily the #2 most improved ship.
What about fire spray?
Yeah, fire spray, man.
Also good, but I think the fire spray was at least, like, you at least had a few, you know, pilots that could win. You know, you had some Caths, you had some Boba Fett wins, you had some strong pilots. Fire spray maybe #3 for me.
Yeah.
If I had to, like,
Kind of takes the
Punisher,
place
Hawk,
of
fire spray.
the Jumpmaster and the Lancer from where they were in 1.0.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because
Which were way stronger.
neither are as good in 2.0.
Yeah.
No, and very deliberately so. We wanted them to be.
Yeah, it
we wanted them
seems
to be
deliberate.
good but more fair. And if they're not good enough, again, they can come down in points. And that's the big thing. Like, as long as you don't make the chassis too crazy, I really believe that there's a sweet spot in points values where you can find a home for anything. Even a ship that's bad, if you make it cheap enough, it's pretty okay. So, to a point. To a point.
I mean, for most interesting change, I'm
Yeah.
actually going to say the TIE Advanced prototype.
What? See, that hasn't changed radically. What do you
It
say
hasn't,
about
but the
that?
Inquisitor is very interesting now.
I really like the new Inquisitor.
He's really
Yeah.
cool.
I'm
The-
really, I'm
first
really
off,
fond of him.
supernatural Talon rolls are really fun.
Here we
Yes,
are,
they
Supernatural again.
Supernatural
Yeah,
again.
no, that card's no joke.
Fire control on him, obviously, right?
Mhm.
Like that's pretty good. But the his ability, like if you get trapped at range 1,
Oh,
like
yeah,
turning
he
off
can-
like Fen Rao,
He can help.
Boba, like fearlessness, like it's so much
Yeah.
fun. I mean, that's obviously what I'm on 2.0. but still.
Yeah.
And he's relatively cheap compared to like Vader. Like,
He's
I would
pretty
I would pick him
reasonable.
over Supernatural
He's
Vader.
pretty reasonable, yeah. Vader hits harder, but Inquisitor's a little trickier.
Yeah.
He is.
And he can just chip that damage in, you know.
And
He's
he has
very
the base.
consistent. If you can keep him alive and keep him on target, he can really wear down the opponent. Whereas Vader can swoop in and do his huge play. He doesn't necessarily have the longevity or the squirreliness that the Inquisitor has.
He doesn't have the natural evade. He doesn't have the evade.
Right. Now the Vader's I6, and that matters a lot more in 2.0. So
Mhm.
hopefully they're pretty like comparable, and you're like, oh, do I take Vader? Do I take the Inquisitor? And hopefully it's like a matter of preference and playstyle rather than one of them is clearly superior.
Well, I mean that's where like the lack of VI or any ability to
Exactly,
change.
and that was
initiative-
another big thing. Is like
Yes,
that is
so
gone.
good. The like I mean
that
just
that
Fen
card
Rao.
made everything so hard to design. I'm so glad it's gone.
Fen Rao in 2.0 was oh my god. My friend is a 10-point business. That's
Yes.
like all right, I have to get lucky.
Yeah, for real, for real. No, all those cards, every card that made my life miserable, we got rid of. And Frank and Max too. Is like we got rid of Push the Limit, we got rid of Engine Upgrade, we got rid of Veteran Instincts, we got rid of Auto Thrusters. Anything that was way too universal, and when we would design a ship, it was like, well, we got to factor in this, and this, because every single ship in the game can have it. And in 1.0, we couldn't even tell a ship that it couldn't have a mod. So literally every ship in the game could take Engine Upgrade. And if every ship in the game can take Boost, like that's a design nightmare. You can't control that.
Well, when upgrade cards are, or when cards are stapled to each other. That's
That
the
too.
problem.
That too. Yeah. Yeah. Anything with a good dial just took PTL. Just full stop, unless they were doing VI or Predator or
Yeah,
expertise.
I have a good term.
Exactly.
Lone Wolf.
Lone Wolf, yeah, Lone Wolf. But I mean, you see what I mean? There were like these 5 cards that people would take. And really it was like 3 and then sometimes these other ones, depending on some specific lists. So I'm really happy to see all that stuff go. We've tried to really keep everything much more compartmentalized, so it's easier to balance. I love linked actions. That was Frank's idea. Brilliant idea. Great replacement for PTL. And we gave Poe PTL. He gets to have it for being so sweet.
Speaking to the linked actions, I'm just generics having access to linked actions, especially your interceptor type ships, your interceptor, your Fang, your even the A-wing to some degree, like those having access to those makes those generics much more valuable than they were in 1.0 easily. Like that alone is an upgrade just for those ships.
Then flipping the other side of the coin, what are the chassis that just have been slap down from existence.
You mean besides the jump master?
Oh, the jump master got it good, didn't it?
Miranda.
Oh yeah.
Miranda, yeah.
She needed it.
She needed it. Basically, everything that you do see in the top, whatever out there got punched.
They're still good.
Stinger's so good.
Yeah.
Hey, you know.
Yes. Yes.
The Reaper got it, right? No,
Yes.
no white terms.
Well, see, the
white
Reaper, so interestingly, so I'll just go into like our design philosophy for like the last couple of 1.0 releases, which was, the heck with it. Why not make something
That's
sweet?
exactly what we
That's
thought.
why.
We knew it feels that way. It's what happened.
So I'll clarify, I didn't actually work on the last couple of waves, but like, Max was like, should 5 Xwings be legal? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? He was like, should the Reaper do this? And I was like, yeah, why not? Is Krennic too good? I don't care. In full honesty. No, and they tried to balance it. They actually did work to make it balanced, but there was this sort of liberating feeling of like, we can push the limits a little bit here, so to speak. On some of this late period design, because it's only going to be in the competitive scene for a while, and let's let players have fun. Let's let players play Luke and Biggs and Wedge one last time in 1.0. Let's make them sweet. Why not? And ditto the Reaper, And so we did that, and then we started playing around with it a little more, and in 2.0, and we're like, okay, that's probably too good. We need to chill that out. And the other thing about the Reaper is like it ended up on a small base because it didn't make any sense on a large, and it never really it was one of those things where like, well, I guess we got to put it on something. It can't be a medium base yet, so that was weird because we were sort of designing two things at the same time and trying to make it trying to make it balance in both games, but certainly focusing much more on the one that was going to be enduring for many years. So if the Reaper is a little bit weak, consequentially, that's where like points values come in. And even in like the rules reference, like if jam is too weak, like we have a living rules document, we can alter that. I'm not saying we will, but that's a tool we have. It's one of the many alteration tools that we can easily do. If it's not good enough, we could say, oh, okay, well it's range 1 or range 1 to 2 bullseye or 1 to 2 in arc or whatever, because it's not on any cards anymore. We can just fiddle with it.
Fantastic. So we know that the competitive play is going to include events that have different squad building requirements. That's something you guys have been really talking up. And I wonder, as players, I want you to hear them out, and let's see kind of where we can meet in the middle here. Do you believe that squad building is a skill? Is my first question. And how do you think players will adjust with this new angle of approaching Xwing if we believe that squad building is now a required skill in order to be successful? Anybody can take that?
I mean, it's definitely a skill, but you can still net list. Like, you don't have to. In fact, in my last article, if I can plug myself a little, I specifically say go out and net list. Like that's not something to be ashamed about. Like, oh, you got that off the internet? Yes, I did. Like the
Helps you learn.
Yeah, the list I won my first worlds with, I basically took it off the internet and then just tweaked it a little bit for my own play style, and then I was like, oh yeah, this works pretty well. Like so it is a skill, but it's not necessarily a skill you have to have. And as long as you realize you don't have that skill, because if you think you're a good squad builder and you're not, then you're gonna have trouble.
This is true. I'll add though that like there are certain players that really are kind of squad building mavericks that come up with this crazy stuff, and that's generally where upgrade combos come into play that I haven't seen that can be very problematic. I mean, Jeff Burling's a really good example of that. Like every single time he shows up to a tournament, some weird nonsense, and somehow he makes it work. Often. So yeah, it's definitely a skill, but and I would say that it was much more of a skill or a necessity perhaps in 1.0 than we are trying to have it be in 2.0. Obviously, you need to build a good list. Like that's just, you can't play a card game and build a bad deck and expect to do well with it. But we're hoping that the what constitutes a good list is much more forgiving. If you just take ships that you like and you put a reasonable combination of abilities together, I'm hoping that will put that squad in a much stronger place than it would have previously. That example of like, oh, you brought a fire spray, you lost. I never want to see that happening, in 2.0. Like that's the big thing. It's like every single ship should be competitive, at least theoretically, in the right list, depending on your playstyle and depending on what else you bring to make it a cohesive whole.
I think a bigger part of squad building, especially now in second edition being a skill, is being ready to be adaptive for it, because more content, 2 more factions that they're super brand new, not including the eventual First Order Resistance, but now the potential point changes. Yeah, well, the 2 and then the 2 more, like the ones we never heard of before, the Republican CIS.
We're gonna do a barrel roll.
More barrel rolls. So, I think being ready to be adaptive with your squad building, because not only like the new stuff and point changes, but just what you're gonna find that becomes your local meta, and then the overarching meta of the high competitive scene. Like, it's gonna be different everywhere.
And list building, being good at list building in 1.0 is different than being good at list building in 2.0 a little bit. I mean, like, a lot of it carries over, but like a lot of the things you look for in a good list in 1.0 don't exist in 2.0, or like putting like these staple on upgrades on everything, like that doesn't necessarily carry over. And like, you don't always want to fill your EPT slot in 2.0 because you don't have to. You don't have to put 100 upgrades on and have these combos. So it's very different skills, and you're looking for different things, I think, in 2.0 right now.
There's less easy synergy.
Yeah.
Like, there's less obvious synergy. There's synergy, but it's often ship to ship versus a combination of upgrades. Certainly there are combinations of upgrades that work well, and combinations of upgrades on ships. But one of the things I'm finding is I reach for upgrades much less frequently in 2.0. Oftentimes I'll reach for another ship first, and I think that's a good thing. I think lots of ships on the table is more fun. I think it leads to more interesting games. It's more pew-pew, more stuff goes boom. That's a good thing.
I mean, that was the problem with 1.0. If you look throughout history, like all the ships with long upgrade bars were the ones that broke the game.
Exactly. Oh,
Exactly.
exactly.
Jumpmaster,
Yep.
K-Wing.
Because it's less predictable. It's,
Like
it's,
the third.
you have exponentially more combinations
yeah.
to play test and worry about. And yeah, exactly. Yep.
Fantastic. So, Ryan, you're in my mind here because that's exactly where I'm going with the 7 factions. So at Gen Con, we found out that we're going to be adding the Separatists and the Grand Republic as new factions, in addition to breaking off the Resistance and the First Order into their own. So 7 total. How do you think having 7 factions is going to affect the way that competitive players approach the game?
Maybe travel less because their wallet hurts already. But more open-minded. Like, you're gonna have to fight and try as many things as you possibly can. It's gonna be really hard to keep up with. Like, even on a high competitive level, like, a lot of us right now 1.0, like, we know the top lists. It's pretty easy to see. It's been that way for many months now. But in 7 faction territory with multiple new ships, it's going to take a while to adapt and change, and then it's going to change after that, and then after that. So it's going to be multiple complexities coming together.
I think it's a good thing for FFG because it lets you guys, like, you have different factions that have like different upgrade cards limited to that faction, so I think it's easier to balance. Eventually, like, because I know a big thing like
That was a little bit of an amen.
Seriously.
yeah, you have to worry about all these combos of existing things if you're introducing a new card to like Rebels, but if you're doing to a new faction, you have all these new possibilities. So I think that's really good.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you noticed that because that was very key. Like, there are a lot more faction-specific upgrades. Factions are much more compartmentalized, so they're much more isolated and easier to control. If we ever are worried about an upgrade and we really want it to stay the same, like we have text we like, we have an effect we like, we think it's cool, but we're like, geez, I don't know if this is going to be okay in Imperials or in Rebels. It's like, well, let's just make that Separatist only. Problem solved. Theme it around some actually like lore-specific thing that only the Separatists had access to, and then we have a cool ability that we didn't have to change, that we got to keep in the game, and now we only ever have to worry about it on Separatist ships, or even more specifically, maybe only on ships with Calculate. And then we could do a cool thing that we don't have to worry about 100 different pilots using that thing. So it's more design space, and it's easier to balance, and it's just a better way to approach things if you can kind of wall it off and reduce that danger of it becoming out of control on something you didn't think about because you just didn't see it or didn't test it enough or whatever. So, yeah.
So one of the things I like best about Seven Factions is that, so hopefully every one of them flies differently and feels differently, has a different theme to it. So like you sit down and there's your separatist opponent and you're like, oh, it's going to be a bunch of dudes going Roger, Roger and flying around. Yeah, and then you go against, Grand Republic, whatever you want to call it.
Grand Army of the Republic.
Yeah, whatever. You go against them the next round, you're like, oh, it's going to be a bunch of squirrely Jedi doing squirrely Jedi things, and then you go, back to the Imperials, and it's going to be Duncan flying Cinderfell.
Every single game.
A bit of a dream, baby.
And so hopefully all those feel different to play against, and you have to completely change your game plan for how they are.
I'm looking forward to it just in the fact that in a lot of other war type games, there are so many different factions that it can break out to, and that just leads to the possibility of having different play styles, which a lot of people like to talk about. And I mean, I don't know, obviously you can't let us too far behind the curtain,
Right.
but by being willing to add these new factions as Star Wars continues to grow, I would hope that you guys would consider, be like, hey, we just opened up these 2 new or 3 new possibilities for that. So that seems like it could be cool.
There's one other thing that I really like about having 7 factions. So one of the coolest prizes they gave out one year, it was like 2014, I think it was 2014, at Worlds, was the top of faction prize. So they gave, was it 2015?
You beat Jeremy for you were the top rebel.
I was the top rebel, yeah.
Right, yeah, I remember that.
So it was like a themed range ruler that had like your faction symbol on it, and they did it for like Imperial Assault as well, and my friend was playing a weak faction in Imperial Assault specifically because he was like, I don't really want to win, I just want to be the best of that weak faction. And so if there's 7 factions and they're like one of them's kind of weak, but there's cool prizes for being it, like
and the respect of playing that faction.
like you're like, hey, I'm the leader of this faction, I did the best in it.
I kind of like that for L5R. Like if we could do that for Xwing.
It's a good idea.
I mean, like you could have
We know
what is it called? You're called a Hatamoto, right? Or something.
Yeah.
I mean, you're called a Hatamoto, right? For like being the best of your.
For your
but like if you're the best.
Would there be a different name for every faction?
Yeah, if you're the best Imperial player, you're like a moth or something like that, you know?
That's a cool idea.
If you're the best rebel, you're like a terrorist or something.
General, I think, is probably what it would be.
Call it whatever you want, terrorist.
You call the droid.
Huh?
You call the droid leader.
They're commanders. And
Windows XP.
little rib there. Alrighty, so before we open it up,
I do like Windows XP.
before
You're
we
old school.
It's no Vista.
This really took a turn.
So before we open up the panel to audience questions, because I'm sure you guys want to ask these gentlemen some stuff. Alex, I know that I would regret if I didn't take this opportunity while you're trapped to ask,
Block the door, Roy.
at least ask, is there anything at all, even just a tiny sliver of new information about Xwing 2nd Edition that you could give us?
New information.
Yeah, anything at all. Have to ask.
Give us 1.0 auto thrusters.
What can I say? Oh man.
What happens when you put a
Can I ask?
All right, I'm like, right now my brain is in that like, what does marketing let me do? What can I say?
All right.
Lay it on me.
Can Darth Maul cloak? Please.
Yeah.
Oh,
yes! There it is.
There we go.
There it is.
There we go.
I
We
can say
got
that.
we got our tidbits. So
Yes.
that's the
He's a
Sith
big
infiltrator,
Yes,
right?
the Sith
big ship
infiltrator in the
cloak.
cloak.
Yeah, he's big.
That feels
They
like
did
an
the size
okay little
conversion.
kernel to release into the wild.
There you go. So the Sith
For all of you.
confirmed Sith infiltrator can cloak. So we'll
As
go,
you might expect.
I mean that we now we know.
Now you
Stop
know.
playing
don't.
for Darth Maul.
I might. Darth Maul is
100-point Darth Maul.
So we'll go ahead and open it up to panel. To the audience. Raise your hand, and I'll point to you. I saw your hand first.
Will you be bringing harpoons back? No.
Ask Frank. That's,
Just 2 quick questions. One, is there any concern about token management with the addition of calculation, charge, and force? And how long will we have to wait till we get maybe a substantial amount for the new factions? Because everyone's excited about them.
Oh, a substantial amount of content?
I'm sorry, of ships actually, with the release
For
of the new
like,
factions.
you're talking Separatists, Republic.
Right, yes. And
Yeah.
there's now,
And
yeah,
First
exactly.
Order and
FO,
Resistance.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. To answer your first question, token management, yeah, that is certainly something we keep in mind. We had a lot of talk about charge tokens and the Force, and you know, there are games that you can play of 2.0 where there are a lot of little tokens out. But we're trying to do two things. One, we're trying to limit the number in the play area, and we've done a couple things on that front, like with target locks. We've actually made that we've removed half the tokens involved
Reduced
for
it by
that.
50%.
Yeah, exactly. Now 50% later. So what I found, at least personally, and I think people's experiences may vary, but what I found is that while there may be a lot of little tokens to put out, there are fewer in the play area, and in my opinion, despite the increase in the number of tokens, it actually makes play easier. Because when you flip a token, you can look at that card later in the round and be like, did I use the thing? Okay, I used the thing. As long as you remember to do all your maintenance in the end phase, which is designed to be very, exclusive to just, resetting all your stuff, it's actually a little bit easier to play. There are some games and some lists that are a little more complex, like playing a Benthic and Endrio 2-tubes list with S-foils and pivot wing and all these different things. That's a lot of mental maintenance. Some people love that. I like lists like that where you're like, okay, before I activate and you're trying to do all this stuff. But I will say for all of those lists that exist, there are many more very simple, very effective lists that don't require a lot of that sort of fiddliness. So hopefully there's something for every player. And I think at the end of the day, the tokens, there are more of them, but in a lot of ways they actually make play a little smoother. To your second question, yes, we are going to get as many ships out for the new factions as quickly as possible. Because yeah, you need a little bit, you need a stable, you need a healthy sized stable of ships to really play that faction well. And there's a couple things we're doing as well to make certain ships stretch a little further than they maybe ordinarily would. For example, the TIE SF. In first edition, it had kind of this built-in 3 dice out of the front, or a double tap kind of ability with the title. In 2.0, we've made it a separate gunner, the TIE Special Forces gunner. So if you want the 1.0 Special Forces First Order TIE, you can build that. It's a comparable cost. I think it's a little cheaper, but it does what you would expect. It's ever so slightly different in that you have to do a little more arc maintenance, but it's basically the same ship. Dials slightly better, has an evade, but it's roughly the same ship. However, you don't have to equip that gunner. You can equip a veteran turret gunner, and then you can double tap out the front. You can equip no gunner and missiles, and just use it as an ordnance platform. So that one ship, because the gunner is quite expensive and the ship chassis itself got a lot cheaper as just a 2-die chassis, you can build that several ways. So in some ways, it's fulfilling the role, if you want it, of a TIE bomber, or it's fulfilling the role as kind of like a heavy starfighter, like a B-wing or whatever. So that one ship has many different viable forms. So that's one of the ways we're trying to stretch a little further. But we're also just adding new ships as quickly as we can. So we're adding to the Resistance, the RZ2 A-Wing is coming. Hopefully the new Resistance show will give us a whole bunch of material for First Order and Resistance, because even though it's like racing centric, I'm sure there'll be a lot of stuff we can pillage. Rebels gave us a ton of stuff. I'm hoping Resistance will too. And in terms of Separatists and Grand Army of the Republic, there's a million things to choose from. So that's just a matter of cranking it out. And so yeah, we're going to get that. Those factions will be getting the bulk of releases initially. And
you're going to buy them.
Yeah. So yeah, so hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yes.
In terms of the app and points, how often are you going to do maintenance and changes? Are you having regular set dates, or is it just going to happen? And where do you look to find out the information of how you're going to, or why you're going to change things?
That's a great question. In terms of when we're going to do it, we're not going to do it willy-nilly. It's going to be at scheduled intervals, 2 or 3 times a year. And we will establish a schedule, communicate that schedule, and adhere to that schedule, essentially. I'm thinking it's going to be 3 times a year. Don't quote me on that. It might be 2. In any case, it will be known well in advance. Tournament organizers will know when it's going to happen so that they can prepare for it. And it's going to be clearly communicated, and it's not just going to be like you wake up one morning and you're about to go to a tournament and your ship is 5 points more expensive and your list is legal. We don't want that to happen. In terms of why we're going to do things, I don't know that we are planning to like explicitly release like a patch notes kind of thing. Oh, that's an interesting idea. I haven't really thought about that. That might be an interesting idea. It might be better to just do it and see if people can figure out why we did it. Often it will be in direct response to community consensus and tournament data and stuff. I mean, we're not just going to be like arbitrarily fiddling with points. So it'll be pretty clear when things are happening and very organized so that it's not a surprise.
So if you go beyond the rules for a minute, all of our communities have seen a big drop-off in participation since the 2.0 announcement.
Mm-hmm.
But I can speak for our area in Detroit. We saw a lot of that even before 2.0.
Yep.
So how do you rebuild the community now with a new product coming out? What are your
That's a good question. I know you guys are all pretty invested in communities and community interaction, so I'll kick it to you guys first, and then I'll give you my feedback on it.
Start somewhere down there.
Yeah, I would say just the app sounds like it has the opportunity to run a multitude of type of events that can be still structured within it, make it easy for people to get to and know like what they're playing, and especially for people who you want to get into the game that are new, those threat cards are money. Like you pre-build something, let them enjoy it, see what they like, and go from there. Start simple. Host events. I judged my first store championship this year. It was fun. Like I had fun not playing Xwing to watch other people have fun playing Xwing. Even if it was first edition, it'd be even more fun for second edition.
One thing that we did in our local community is we've made an active effort to reach out to those players that we know quit and come out saying, hey, why'd you quit Xwing? Well, I hate Nim Miranda. That doesn't exist anymore. Do you want to come back and play? Well, what would I play? Well, Boba, taking the time to point out what has changed. Like, hey, Boba Fett is like really good in second edition. You could look at Hawks. Hey, do you know Hawks got an extra die? And like the turret moves, like just planting those seeds of interest. Like all you have to do is get them in the door one time, and they'll be like, oh wait, this is different and better. And like, no joke, let them win the first one. If you let, I forgot.
Give them one game.
No, seriously, you let the rookie win, and they're going to be invested, and because you're not there you're there to play a game with them, but you're there to make sure that they have a good time.
You're too hard to wiring off the board.
I still won that game. I did not let the rookie win. Maybe I should have.
If I can take it from there. So I think one of the things that's great about Xwing is the community. I mean, obviously, like that's how you know what I'm saying. That's how we're gonna get people back, right? Like FFG has done a really good job about putting out content and like videos and going on What Team Covenant, doing the world stream and everything, and showing how much it's changed. And like, oh, but I hate this. Well, it's not there. It doesn't exist anymore. Miranda's terrible. It's fine.
She's not great. I wouldn't say she's terrible.
fine.
She's okay.
No, she's terrible.
Much more balanced.
Paul, stop holding on. You're still holding on. Let go.
Nim's good. Kill the pass.
Yeah,
Kill it, yeah.
Nim's aight.
So yeah, what they said, but also new players. I've talked about this before, but like it is much friendlier for new players. I'm not even talking about the rules. I'm just talking about the amount of content.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that isn't even reflective of the design at all. I'm proud of the design. I'm happy with 2.0, but like put that aside, just narrowing the available amount of content down to what is in Wave 1 is so much more approachable. You walk into a store right now and you see 1.0 SKUs and there's a billion of them. And you walk into a tournament and everyone's got a crazy bunch of different ships and lists. It's stuff.
And you don't even recognize them from movies.
And you don't recognize them from the movies. That's
Yeah.
another really good point. Like the original trilogy ships are, of course, in the first wave of release, and so that's one. And two, they're much better now. They're like really competitive. We've been very sure to make them strong.
Yep.
And three, you know, you come into a store and you see the core set and you see, you know, 9 different SKUs that you can buy. And you can pick your faction, you buy a core set and 3 ships, and you are good to go. And I really hope that's going to bring in a bunch of new players, because I think that's really what, in the end, any competitive gaming community needs, is that constant influx of new blood. You grow it. The more that you can grow it, the more people can play games. The more the community spreads, the more people make friends within that community. So yeah, so we're pushing really hard to be new player friendly.
And I think the point of that the ships in the movies are going to be on the table, like competitively.
That's
it's
real.
It's probably the biggest thing, because most of us who play this game started playing because we were Star Wars fans,
Yeah.
not because I'm a competitive miniatures game player and this seems to have a cool system. Like that's some players, sure, like that's the thing, but the majority is because they like Star Wars.
I mean,
And-
Fairship Rebel had all movie ships.
That's true.
Right.
That's true.
There's 5X's
you
every
know-
now.
Yeah, all the there's X-Wings and X-Wing, baby.
That's right. I'll add to that too. This is something that I wasn't really thinking about when we decided to do new factions. It wasn't really like a planned reason for it, but and it didn't even occur to me. But here's the thing: like Star Wars fandom now bridges so many different generations, and obviously I grew up on the original trilogy. I'm 34. That's where my real excitement comes from. That's what I consider to be Star Wars, or that was my gateway into it. But there are a lot of people who grew up with the prequel trilogy, and if not just the movies, but the television show,
Yeah.
and who really love that, who love clone armies, who love like that era. And so I think
Don't worry, a TV show has never ruined X-Wing.
so it's like those younger players are. I'm hearing already a lot of people who are super excited for Clone Wars era stuff.
Oh yeah.
Because that's their Star Wars. That's what brought them into the world. So I think that's going to have a good effect too. That they know that they can play those ships and experience that aspect of the Star Wars universe.
Totally agree. Any other questions out there? Yes.
Just a little, you're talking about doing the different formats, like the Wave 1 competitive formats, as opposed to the sort of more version kit open formats. So what sort of events are probably going to be set for different ways? So like are regionals doing mostly Wave 1, or by the time they happen, Wave 1 and 2? Or are you gonna have like, this is a full open conversion kit regional, and this is a Wave 1, 2 regional, and this is a store champ, like what kind of variety of those different mixes are we looking at?
That's a really great question, and we thought long and hard about this because there are pros and cons to putting the emphasis on one or the other. The simple answer is we want to support both, but since you're asking for more specific details, I can tell you that the majority of sort of like normal tournaments are going to be unlimited. Conversion kits, bring whatever ships you want. Because the fact is that it's a very established, very large community, and most of the players, at least initially, will be players who have collections already. So that is going to be, there are going to be many tournaments in that format, but there are going to be high-level tournaments that are limited to just a set number of ships. Those are going to be a limited format, and that limited format, there will be a path to Worlds. There'll be a path to the major tournaments. So there will certainly be a way for newer players who only have the newly released ships to play competitively, learn the game, and go all the way to the top and compete with the broader spectrum. So yeah, the majority is going to allow people to play with their full collections, but we are definitely going to support that limited format all the way to the top.
If I
Jump on
doesn't the all conversion kits open, right? Doesn't that hurt new players? You're just saying how like available we're making it to new players. How are you making it so that new players can enter? Like if we were to hold a tournament September 13th, like we're having the first 2.0 store championship on September 22nd here in Maryland.
It's not supposed to be a store championship.
You can push days. So we're having the first 2.0 store championship September 22nd. and we don't know what's legal, so I think we're making it wave 1 plus the Reaper and whatever.
Yeah,
But,
that's
like,
totally fine.
Yes, but like, so let's say a new player gets into the game, right? They don't buy the conversion kits
Yep.
because they don't have a 1.0, right? They just buy waves as they come out. But if you make an all conversion kits legal, they have to, I guess, know somebody who can bring them something.
Well, so what I'm trying to get at is that, like, it is my sincere hope that stores will decide to run at sort of the store championship level or the smaller tournament level, whatever format they want. You know, that if they have a lot of new players, they want to entice them, they can run an event that's just the limited format. I believe, and don't quote me on this, and some of these details are not finalized, so I don't want to get too far out on a limb here and get chewed out by OP. But
Zach Rayburn listening in right
right,
now.
right. But I guess what I'm trying to convey, without going into too many specifics, is that limited format that is new player friendly. I want that, and I believe that will be widely accessible on a number of different levels. So it's kind of this balancing act, right? Because you want the existing player base who has particular ships, that are favorite ships. Maybe they don't even own the Wave 1 ships. Maybe their favorite squad is a bunch of Sikhs. They don't own any whatever. I mean, that's not
Table 90.
super likely, but but you know what I mean. Like some players may not even have access to the limited format ship pool because it just doesn't appeal to them. They bought a bunch of Star Vipers or whatever.
And then another
So we want those. Right? So we want those players to have a chance, and we want the new players to have a chance. And my hope is that there's going to be a lot of both formats all over the country, and they both have a path to the top. Yep. So if you just if you're a brand new player, you can get to the very top level just playing limited format tournaments.
What is Worlds going to be unlimited then?
I don't know. I think it's going to involve some more conversations. I can't answer that right now.
And I know one thing that you guys have been pushing and have showed us that you guys are having those wave kits. Like that's a good way for the newer players to really start growing. So I'm excited to see those.
Yeah, that's the hope to really make that stuff accessible.
Is there anybody else who has a question?
Just a quick two-parter. March of next year, Nova sends out its advertisement for its 2019 convention. Is there going to be a premier Xwing event there? That's the first part. And the second part, what have you seen so far in any type of play testing in half points on medium and small base ships for competitive play, since we're talking about competitive play?
I'm going to jump in first.
Yep.
First off, fly Eagles fly. Carry on.
Very nice, very nice. I can't speak for Nova, but my assumption would be yes. I don't see why they wouldn't. It's a popular format. Everything I've heard is that they're going to continue to support it. Question 2 was what? Half points. Half points. Yes, we're doing half points for all ships.
So
But what is it
I will say
impacting competitively is
internal
you're
rules.
you're going to get a lot fewer 200 O's. Like you're not going to win by 100 points as often anymore at all.
So that was sort of the half points rule on large ships was devised when those were the only ships that people really had to worry about escaping, the battle unscathed. But obviously since then, a lot of archetypes emerged that were just as hard to kill. Miranda. And Phantoms, and anything that costs a lot of points, and if you don't 100% kill in a game, can cost you the game, even if it's down to one hull left. So we just sort of thought about it, and we considered changing it for 1.0, even to make it all ships. But by the time we kind of decided we wanted to do that, 1.0 was winding down anyway. But yeah, so that was just a conversation that we had. It's like there's no reason this rule should only apply to large ships. There are certainly small and medium ships that can sort of points fortress and hide away. And that should hopefully lead to fewer games where people are just trying to run out the clock and survive. Because what we really want is we want to see engagement.
Now, I will say to continue on your question, in my group's testing, the half points on every ship has made a huge difference. In both list building, you don't want to build super expensive ships in a lot of lists because you're going to get half points. Things do take damage if they're getting shot. So I know for us, we're leaning towards more ships because then you can kind of spread your points out a little bit. All right, if I get half points on this ship, I'm only giving up a lower percentage of my total squad points. Have you guys had Any of those thoughts in your guys' own team playtesting?
We haven't tested much, but at least in list building, like the simple fact of like, if it's, if an upgrade to you on a ship matters not as much, and one upgrade puts you to an even number, one upgrade puts you to an odd number, I mean, you round down half points. That's something to take into consideration. And then even putting upgrade on a ship overall, it's obviously much more a thought process because you got to include that in your half total.
There's also even odd health values on ships, like a defender has 7 health now, which is actually more of an advantage because you're going to lose 4 health, all 3 before you get to half. And also like shield and hull upgrade can play into that as well. So I think it changes the game quite a bit, and like you have to constantly be evaluating like your win conditions and like how that can change. It goes back and forth a lot more in 2.0, I think, because things are constantly taking damage and that the points are constantly changing.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if it's necessarily all like fewer upgrades, more ships. If you can stack those upgrades to make you a little more survivable, right? Like advanced sensors whisper, right? Like the less you get shot, the less damage you're gonna take, right? Like put upgrades into not taking damage, or if you can't do that, then
Which is much harder to do. Right?
Yeah.
And
At least
also,
the paid way.
yeah.
in my marshal role right now, please.
Show me your star.
Yes, my star.
Where's your hat?
In 2.0 big events, please don't have out your calculator and go every round like go because then I don't know about other judges, but I will be like, no, you're slowing down the game. Like you have to play the game fully, like not be like, can we just hang on for 2 minutes while I do some math and figure out if I have to start running yet? Like
Slowing down the game. What can we do about slow play in 2.0?
yeah.
That's a tricky question, and that is really down to individual judges because it's such a judgment call. But I would encourage, personally, I would encourage marshals and judges to enforce it. You kind of have to be that guy sometimes. If you take on the judge or marshal role and be like, if you see that consistently happening, you gotta just, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to, 30 seconds to finish this round.
What do you do, right?
I mean, that's when I have judged and marshaled, I will, if there are complaints about slow play or if I see it happening, I will come up and I will just set a timer. I'll be like, all right, you've got 1 minute to finish the planning phase. If they've been, consistently slow.
Yes.
And I think that, of course, I'm not going to say how anyone should do anything. That's up to individual.
I went with 2 minutes, but
2 minutes is more generous, yeah. But I mean, like whatever your judgment call is, I think that some amount of activism on the part of policing slow play is necessary, and you kind of just have to get over that feeling of like, oh, I don't want to hassle these players or whatever, because what you're really doing is you're doing the opponent, the person who's taking too long, a favor by moving things along. You're letting them finish the game. I like games that conclude. I don't like games that go to time.
yeah, I mean,
So I think that I would encourage people to hit that more, but it's a judgment call.
you might have seen me wandering around while judging, and every now and again I'll stand there, pull out my phone, bring up the stopwatch, and start counting. If
You have the smartphone now
yeah, the
for it.
smartphone now. Like if you see your opponent, if you see one player standing there looking like this, his dials are down, and he's like.
And you can ask him, like, how long is this phase
Then
going?
I'll just walk behind the other guy and start a stopwatch, and if it's like, after a minute or two, I'll be like, especially if it hits 2 minutes and the guy still hasn't put down those dials, I'll be like, you gotta speed this up.
But what's your punishment?
Your punishment is unsporting conduct.
Yeah, it's in the rules. It's in the tournament rules. You're not allowed to slow play, and the marshal and judge is allowed to even go so far as to DQ somebody. You don't want to do that, obviously, but you want to be like, listen, you need to abide by the rules of playing in a reasonable amount of time. I mean, this is something that all competitive games do. I mean,
Well,
this is not unique to Xwing.
Having come from Magic, like I think there should be a set, like if this
Four
happens,
rules?
if this happens, do this, because like we still don't know what to do if someone dials in a straight with shaken pilot. Like we just kind of established that. I guess you just get to choose their dial, or what happens if my opponent takes my dial and looks at it, right? Like we don't have like.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Hopefully that's something we can
Get
bring
like a
into
chess
the game.
timer for slow play.
Chess timers would actually be kind of cool. It's just not
35
it's not
minutes a
really
player.
feasible for most tournament organizers.
Huh?
But I agree. Floor rules are a good idea. It's something I'd like to bring to the game. but it's not my department.
Whose
So-
department?
Organized one?
Talk to
Organized
Wade.
one.
All right, so we
But I
have,
will certainly pass it along.
we have two more
Start messaging Wade.
questions from the audience.
So I've got a comment first, and then a question.
You took notes.
I'm sad that Tragedy Simulator made it to 2.0, but I'm glad to hear that bombs are not as good as they were. So thank you. at least
Yes.
for that. I'm excited.
I'm sorry, and you're welcome.
On the topic of swarms,
Didn't you fly Miranda last year at Nationals?
I didn't have missiles. I had 9
You had
point
Corn
bid.
Miranda and 8-point bid.
Are we sure Spain's not better?
But
She's good.
if you can remember off the top of your head
Mhm.
what upgrade or what expansion Thread Tracers comes in?
The
Thread
type-based
tracers.
prototype.
No, the 2.0.
Oh,
Oh. You like the thread tracers?
I like the Thread Tracers.
No comment, but noted.
Thank you.
Thread tracers are cool. I like that upgrade.
So you're talking about with the app that you can adjust points in different, ways if you need to increase them or decrease them. How are you going to actually track that? Is there going to be like systems in the app that you can see which upgrades and ships are more successful than others, or is that just going to be like a community basis where you hear an uproar and you say, hey, we have to take a look at this, or are you going to see like, okay, this list is constantly winning tournaments, we have to do something about it?
That's a great question. I don't know all the technical specifications of the app. It is my understanding that we are going to attempt to collect tournament data, whether through the app or through other means. Because certainly in 1.0 we use tournament data and fan feedback to determine these things. So yes, we'll be looking at tournament data. We'll be looking at general sort of consensus. We'll be looking at our own playtesting, because we actually have 3 layers of playtesting in Xwing 2.0. There's our initial internal testing, which is then expanded into the normal pre-release, pre-GM, Goldmaster testing pool, where we look at all kinds of things, but we don't worry about points as much. And then that product is finalized. It goes out to the factory. It's done. We can't touch it anymore, but we know what everything does. So then we take those files and we send them to a completely separate group of testers, again, pre-release, and those testers analyze that stuff and try to determine what the points value should be. Once that is done, we'll lock those into place, and then that information is released. And then the third wave of testing is, of course, the public response. The PDF that's out right now has gone through the first 2 waves, and it has yet to hit the wider world fully. But I fully expect that after 3 or 4 months of deep community engagement, we will identify some problems and be able to very readily see what we need to tweak in the next points update. So it's actually a pretty great system where we go through all these different control methods. And the best control is, as always, the community is going to find the most interesting combinations, the most powerful stuff. Because when it goes out from a pool of several hundred to maybe 100,000 players, it's definitely going to reveal a lot more than we were able to do internally. So there's a lot of steps that go through it, and I'm really confident that we're eventually going to get to some pretty excellent levels of balance in the game.
Well, fantastic. I want to thank all of you guys for coming and watching the panel. Thank you, our panelists, and thank you to Nova Open for having us.
Thanks.